Punch Drunk is an ensemble piece that we made in 2004 to mark the 10th anniversary of Vincent Dance Theatre. And the general concept for the 6 performers was that they were stuck in a theatre that they couldn't leave. And the piece really looks at a sort of decaying grandeur. It looks at acts and the act of performance. It looks at the performer's vulnerability, all set in a kind of vaudeville, burlesque type environment that the performers can't leave. I suppose after 10 years of making work, I was looking at what it means to build a body of work and how stuck in that as an ensemble, in a good way, you feel that you are committed to building a repertoire of work. Not that we ever sort of think of ourselves as a rep company, but there's a body of work that's building, and after 10 years you sort of mark an anniversary that clocks that you're not in it for the short term anymore, that maybe this is the career of the company and the career of yourself. And I suppose, I was celebrating the humour that we have in the work. The set design was probably the one that we all like the most. It's kind of cross between a kind of cabaret and circusy, decaying theatre type look. Again, there were areas and zones in the set that allowed people to do the acts that they're good at. And in terms of the content, I think we were really interested in mashing things up even further than we had in the piece before. So there was striptease, there was a ballet solo, there were great big sort of vaudeville numbers from the ensemble of 6 people. There were really crappy acts that Aurora did, with a plank and 2 chairs. Patrizia did these really beautiful entrances in silence that kicked the whole show off, which is all about appearing desperately eager to be loved by an audience. So we were looking at that as well. And some really lovely duet work as well within the piece, intimate, release-based stuff that was releasing people out of the environment as well as with each other. And TC was in her element in this piece because she did a series of very funny acts with a large tin bucket that she got stuck in. And again, a lot of the things that she did as a more mature performer were about trying to escape this environment that she was stuck in, which interestingly, a couple of years later, she did actually escape the company. So Punch Drunk looked at theatrical artifice, the act of doing an act, acts going wrong, and the vulnerable state that leaves performers in, because in live performance things do go wrong and happy accidents happen when you're making work that provide material that you weren't expecting. So we're kind of making that explicit within the piece. And also for me, I think as a company it felt like this was the piece where we really matured, in terms of the 3 poles were solidly in the work, Janusz, Aurora and Patrizia. TC was working with us as usual. I invited Lindsay Butcher, who is an aerialist, who's older than us, to be a sort of aerial burlesque dancer within the piece. So we went up in the air again, much more successfully than we had in Caravan of Lies, because she is actually an aerialist and a really good one. And then a guy called Geir Hitten, who is a Scandinavian guy who worked with us as well. And it felt like that group of 6 performers, with me directing and Richard Loden doing the set and John Avery doing the music, and for the first time I worked with a costume designer who designed the work, Amanda Griffin, I think her name was, I can't remember. And that's the first and only time I've worked with a costume designer, because we knew we wanted something a little bit less dour than the costumes that I usually source and find. And so the look of it was really beautiful, actually. Very visually striking, and lights again were integrated into the set. So the whole thing felt like a very mature performance, actually, both emotionally, visually and physically. I think the work has always been interdisciplinary, and I suppose in a piece where you actively exploit people's individual physical skills. So with Janusz, actually this was the first time that he'd no, it wasn't. It was the second time that he'd made a piece, but we really exploited his ballet skills in this work. And there's a really beautiful, moving ballet solo that Janusz does in a tutu that everyone claps after, because he's a very accomplished dancer. He's chosen, a little bit like Patrizia's chosen not to become a classical violinist, Janusz has chosen not to be a classical dancer, but he brings all those skills into the mix, and he's happier dancing a more contemporary release-based partnering solo work. But I sort of encouraged him to face this demon, but do it in a way that was dressed up and looked quite throwaway. And so I suppose in terms of interdisciplinarity, we were mixing contemporary dance with ballet. Lindsay came in and took the physicality up into the air, which was quite surprising, I think, to audiences. The set had a sense of height, and also zones where you could hide, so Patrizia could sit and hide behind her neck curtains that she kind of bursts forth through in very theatrical style. I think probably it was the most successful exploitation of each individual person's skill, and that's where the cross-discipline comes, because TC is very funny, Aurora's very dry and funny. They both were these battling twins, twin figures who went through a series of crappy acts that didn't work, a sort of failing theatricality, which they both play very well. So, yeah, in terms of crossing forms, when you have an environment that can hold, a set design essentially, an environment that's visual and physical that can hold many different forms within it, including music, lighting, different physical forms, humour, text. It's like a vessel that can hold those things, and the audience feels safe enough to watch anything happen because you've created an environment in which anything can happen. And I think that's the strength of that piece, possibly more than many other pieces, that the environment held whatever we wanted to put in it. And what that gives you freedom to do as a director is let anything go. And because it was a 10th anniversary production, we actually threw caution to the wind, and when we were making it, we kept saying we're going to lose our Arts Council funding making this, because it wasn't dance, it had a lot of dance in it actually, but we just thought, bugger it, we'll just do whatever we want in this space. And we had quite a lot of fun making this piece, and we look back very fondly on that as a 10-year marker of the company. The ensemble consolidated, the design, the music, the lighting designed by Jim Harrison, who lit a lot of my work by then. The team of, say, 10 of us was actually extremely strong at that moment in the company's history. John Avery composed the music for Punch Drunk, and it was his usual mix of haunting, beautiful, almost background music that dance work could happen to. And also I asked him to create for us quite big kind of musical numbers that the ensemble could dance together to. And he's very good at that, as he was making circus-y type music for Caravan of Lies. So he gave us a few big numbers to choreograph work to. And Patrizia played the violin live, and one of the challenges for TC in making Punch Drunk was to learn the accordion. And she played that quite badly, but well enough to hold a tune with, I think, Patrizia played the violin, TC played the accordion. I can't remember what Aurora played, she was banging something, but they created a little band. And that's another example of us throwing caution to the wind. They're not all musicians by any stretch, and actually some of them can't even hold a beat, but they can when they're dancing, but not musically, which is slightly bizarre. But together we just sort of thought, again, why not? Let's just form a little messed up band that create music for something to happen to. So that happened in the show as well. Making Punch Drunk, at the time I didn't know, but my marriage was about to come to an end. And I was married to the set designer, Richard. And I had an inkling, but I didn't know what was coming. And so what I've described as the cast and the crew being the most whole it's ever been for the company actually then exploded the year after. Well, actually that year, I think. which was a bit of a shame, really, because it felt very rich as a series of collaborations. And interestingly, the next piece that I made, which was really about my divorce, called Broken Chords, which was a hugely successful piece, continued the ensemble vein and in fact grew it to 8 performers, continued the live music integration, continued the wide and beautiful visuality. But I then started designing the sets because, of course, Richard and I didn't collaborate from that point onwards once our marriage ended. And interestingly, it was also, and I didn't know this at the time either, the beginning of the end of a collaboration with John Avery in our live work, because the next piece that I made brought in a live composer who played the cello, called Alex Katona, and that new influence started to undermine the way that I'd worked compositionally with John in a really good way, but it was too many cooks. So Punch Drunk, in a way, looking back now, marks the end of what was a very rich collaboration with Richard, with John Avery, with the group of performers that I'd worked with. The thing that continued was the group of performers, but little did I also know that Broken Chords, that I went on to make, would be the last piece that TC made as well. So, interesting times.